Because when we can feel what it is that they are feeling, like what's behind all of that noise out here, what's actually going on. When you can feel that, you actually don't need a psychologist or a book or anybody to tell you what to do, because the doing, the actionable thing, is going to come from your being. And so the phrase "see it, then feel it, then be it." You see what's going on with your kid, with your spouse, with your coworker, with whoever it is in the world. You see what's going on, get past that real quick and drop into the feeling. Feel what's going on. Because I promise you, for every single horrid, awful, outlandish behavior, there's a story behind that that's going to bring you to your knees. And as soon as you can drop into the feeling of that, then you will be inspired to step into the energy of what is required in that moment for you to do what is called for.
Welcome to Parenting Teens Today with Jesse LeBeau.
Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, the much anticipated, the much awaited Dr. Vanessa. Can I call you Dr. V? I always abbreviate everything. What's the deal?
Dr. V is the way to go.
Okay, perfect. And I'm very excited. We were just talking before we started this about how, we share some background in geography, although I am not from Western Canada. And what city specifically are you in?
Well, I grew up in a teeny tiny town on the prairies, actually, called Crossfield, Alberta. I currently live just outside Vancouver, right on the West Coast, which is quite different from where I grew up. Where I grew up, there were no traffic lights, including all of the farming community that surrounded our little town. There were 1,500 people, 27 kids in my graduating class.
I love an underdog. I love the remote stories. And
Right.
we actually used to take, I think it was like about a 6-hour ferry boat ride from Alaska to Prince Rupert
Yeah.
to play basketball. Is Prince Rupert in the?
Yeah, so Prince Rupert is it's a little far away from here, but I've been to Prince Rupert a couple of times. It's like planes, trains, and automobiles to get there. You fly in a plane, you land on an island, then they boat you on on a barge. You get on this big bus, you throw your luggage in the back of a plywood lined van, and then they barge you over to the mainland. And the very first time I went to Prince Rupert, that crazy basketball tournament was happening that weekend. And I was like, how is Prince Rupert the center of the universe for basketball?
Yeah. So we would go out there for school games. And the one that I bet you're talking about is the native, the native gold medal.
Right.
They have different names, but yeah, it is ball is life. They love it. I remember their mascot was the Rainmakers, which is great because you and I know from being up there, 13 feet of rain in our little city, probably about the same kind of thing.
Yeah. They get like 2 hours of sunshine a year. Not really, but
yeah, it feels that way.
Yes.
Well, they would call it liquid sunshine in Ketchikan. They literally have a thing in the center of town. It's 13 feet of liquid sunshine. So you just got to lean in and embrace it, or move a little bit east and go to Ontario. Although I'm sure it's just as much rain there, probably.
Well, and rain that gets a little frozen at times. So it's different. I once went to listen to Eckhart Tolle speak here in Vancouver, where it also rains 9 months out of the year, and he's like, "Listen. You can look out your window every morning and be like, it's raining again." Or you can look out your window every morning and be like, oh, look at water is falling from the sky. You decide. And how you decide to respond to it is going to shape how your day goes and how it all feels. So you get to choose.
Isn't that amazing? So that's literally the whole message that I'm out promoting and speaking and doing all that stuff is attitude. Attitude is everything. It's the one thing you can control. So I love hearing that because it really is. And when you grew up looking out at the rain, you're like, okay, there is heavy depression. There is heavy alcoholism and substance abuse in these, especially in these remote places where there isn't as much to do as well as I know but your mantra, kind of your motto, is it the discipline with what is exactly the one that you would you say is your signature phrase or keynote speech? It's really the discipline, right?
Yeah, it came out of my discipline book, and the phrase is see it, feel it, be it.
Perfect. Behind you. Duh. I was thinking the discipline without damage was the one that I was thinking.
Yeah.
This is it. Okay.
Well, and see it, feel it, be it really does lead into the whole concept of disciplining without damage, because the idea is that, so many of us, we want to know what to do. So I practiced as a psychologist until last year, actually, when I retired to do my global work. And the
Yeah.
number one question that I got asked over those 20 years was, what do I do when, and then fill
Yep.
in the blank. And I
Yeah.
work a lot with parents. And so it would be, what do I do when my kid won't behave? What do I do when my kid talks back at me? What do I do when? What do I do when? What do I do when? And my honest to goodness answer, even with 13 years of post-secondary education, and I'm 20 years into being a mom myself, I've read all the books, I've done all the things, I wrote a couple books, all of that under my belt. If you ask me, what do I do? My honest answer is, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the question, I believe it was Wayne Dyer that once said, we're not human doings, we're human beings. And we want to know, like, what's the action plan? What do we do? But the reality is that is the wrong question. The question ought not to be, what do I do when, but rather, how do I be when? And so if I'm working with a parent who's come in, let's say they have a teen that's, gone off the rails, or they've got a child that's acting out, I have very little interest in squashing those challenging behaviors, but I have a lot of interest in bringing an understanding to the inner workings of that child. Because when we can feel what it is that they are feeling, like what's behind all of that noise out here, what's actually going on, when you can feel that, you actually don't need a psychologist or a book or anybody to tell you what to do, because the doing, the actionable thing, is going to come from your being. And so the phrase, see it, then feel it, then be it. You see what's going on with your kid, with your spouse, with your coworker, with whoever it is in the world. You see what's going on, get past that real quick and drop into the feeling, feel what's going on. Because I promise you, for every single horrid, awful, outlandish behavior, there's a story behind that that's going to bring you to your knees. And as soon as you can drop into the feeling of that, then you will be inspired to step into the energy of what is required in that moment for you to do what is called for.
Amazing. Isn't it funny how sometimes we overcomplicate things so much, whether you said it's a million podcasts and books and webinars and all these things, or just knowing innately, like we have this compass inside of us, and so much is that gut instinct, right? Like you can meet someone and you feel something's off, but you go through and you spend weeks and times in counsel and background checks and all these things. And at the end of the day, after all of that, you still got it wrong. And your initial gut instinct was the thing that you should have let be the determining factor of whatever that situation was. I feel like that's kind of what I'm taking away from the being a little bit.
Yeah, and we are incredibly intuitive. I remember years ago reading Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, which is where, like in a microsecond, we've blinked something and we kind of know. And yet we're very oddly socialized, to kind of squash all of those things down and try to get more into our logical mind and, navigate through situations in a way that we can explain with words. When really, as human beings, we have this level of intuition, this wisdom that comes from deep inside our soul somewhere. And when we can listen to what it is that gut instinct is, it will never steer you wrong. And I always am saying to parents, like, I am not the expert here. Don't look at me that way. You are. You're the expert. How did it feel when so-and-so said you should, do this horrible, awful thing to your kid to get them to behave? And the parents always say, oh, I didn't love it at all. It made me cry behind closed doors. Right. So you knew, like, the answer was in you. You just had to make the noise all around you be quiet enough that you could listen to what's inside of you and just tap into that. It's almost like you're going into life, like feeling your way along this dark hallway and looking for the portals. And whenever you find them, just lean into them, because it will give way to the direction that you're supposed to be headed.
Yeah. And when you are talking about being it and embodying it, do you feel like part of that is just how you show up to address that particular situation? Or is it also kind of a mirroring situation where they're being that, okay, I need to be more patient because this is where they're struggling. And then they're going to see the way that I'm handling the traffic, the person that's flipping me off and honking their horn or whatever the situation is, because that's something that seems to be a reoccurring theme from these conversations with awesome people like yourself, is like, it's less of what you say and more of what you do. And in this case, it sounds like in who you're choosing to be.
Yeah, because your doing flows from your being. And so sitting energetically in a space of, being positive and being glasses half full and being a leader and being wise and really making sure that that has fueled where you're headed, what you're saying, how you're showing up, that it's coming from that deeper well of wisdom inside of you. Um, years ago, I used to say to parents all the time, like, I don't care if you're saying the Lord's Prayer to your children. What I care about is the look on your face. What I
Mm,
care about is the twinkle that you have in your eye for them. What I care about is the tone of your voice. It's like all of those little micro things that you don't even think about, but you have them like coming out of you because you love your kid. That's the stuff that matters. And
mm,
that, whether we're showing up for our own children or the children of the world, whatever it is, it's
yeah.
having that essence inside of you that comes out of you. I was recently on tour in Australia, and there was a little boy who his mom had left him at home with a babysitter to come to my talk. And she sent me a message when she got home later that night. He happened to still be awake. He was 5 years old. And my name being Vanessa, he just pronounced it incorrectly. He's like, Mama, how was it listening to Dr. Van Essence?
Oh, it's a
And I
great.
was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
he's so wise, Dr. Van Essence, because it really is about like the essence of how you're showing up. It's not the words themselves. Of course, there's certain words that would be highly problematic, but it's not so much exactly what you're saying or exactly what you're doing. It's more about how you're coming into the moment and how you're filling the air around the person with that certain kind of je ne sais quoi energy.
Isn't it funny? It's that same gut instinct of like, should I trust this person? Am I just safe around them? Your kids have that same inside of them where they can tell if you are being genuine and if you care about them, because we all have that as humans. I when I went off to college, I left Alaska, I went to California, and I just was so excited to be somewhere where it was sunny and the beach and all these
So
beautiful
different.
people. Yeah, and so I would talk to these people and they would open up to me and they'd pour their life stories out to me.
Mm.
And I realized later in life that the reason why they did that was just because they felt safe and they felt that I genuinely was interested and cared about them. And it's funny in the speaking, as we're going to do all these speakings, you can see people who have like can recite it perfectly, word for word, have all the information, the perfect slides. But a person who is passionate, but maybe stumbles over their words or forgets a thing or is just beginning, if they're passionate, I'll take that speech over the one person who's just phoning it in every single time.
Yes.
And we see that even in our program where people will come to us after their kids have gone to therapy for years and years and never connect with anyone, with someone who maybe isn't even as credentialed as these different people they've been to in the past, but because they feel genuinely seen, heard, and cared about, they're opening up on the first session about things they never did in 4 years with someone else. And I think that's the superpower of just being. You see it, you feel it, but then you got to be it.
Mm-hmm.
I love it so much. So you're doing such incredible work all over the world globally. You're able to leave your your regular 9 to 5 that you're doing all before that. How does the Dr. V story begin? So I know you were out there in a small place. How did you get to this point? Find your kind of passion and why, and translate it into what you're doing today, because you've built an amazing community. So if we could,
Yeah.
I'd love to rewind a little bit and just hear how
Yeah.
you get here.
So that's such a great question. I love that you asked me that. So when I was young, I was a competitive figure skater. And I loved skating. Skating was life to me. I
Very
lived in this,
Canadian.
that's right.
Good,
And I
good.
had my own key to the rink in town, which like I had to walk across this field and I would go let myself into the rink at 5 in the morning and I would train before school. I often would shower before I left in order to wake up because it's very early. But then I would go to the rink and it'd be so cold that my ponytail would be frozen, hanging down the back of my neck. And then
Yeah.
I would go to school for the day. Then I would go back to the rink and I would train some more. And I needed eventually to make some money because my parents were, working very hard, and those lessons and all the training were very expensive. And so I was like, no problem, I'll get a summer job and I'll make some money. And I'd always kind of had an affinity for working with children. And so my summer job became working at kids' day camps. And I lived for it. Not only did I love skating, but I loved working with kids. And I did that every summer from the time I was 13 years old until well into my 20s. And
Wow.
along the way, I realized, hey, I could also coach skating lessons for little kids. And so that's how I paid my way through my undergrad degree, was coaching skating. And I'm really enjoying working with children. So I was studying psychology as an undergrad student, but in the sciences. I was heavily involved in research looking at brains and how they respond to certain external stimuli, and very heavy on the science side. And it occurred to me, like, this is really cool. And I want to apply this in real life. Like, I don't want to sit in a lab and work with rats. I want to be out in the world
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
like, see how this comes to life in children and with their families. And so I became a psychologist who specialized in working with children. And I did that in a very, what I would say, traditional way for several years, where I would work a lot with kids and do play therapy and these kinds of things. And I realized as I was going along that I was kind of banging my head against a brick wall sometimes,
Yeah.
because it wasn't the child that actually needed to be shifted.
Yeah.
What needed to be shifted was the world around the child, so that that world was more aligned with and resonant for who that child was. And in order to do that work, I needed to get to that child's people,
Yeah.
namely their parents, but also their teachers and the other grown-ups in their life. And so my practice really began to shift towards that. I started to get invited to speak at different events. And one thing led to the next, and here we are.
Wow. So originally focused working directly with kids. And
Yeah.
you see, hey, and this is something we see a lot too. It's like, that's great when we can go make so much impact in a kid's life, but if they go back to a home, and I'll use the word toxic, it's a toxic environment. And if I'm being honest, I feel like probably every home is in some level
Sure.
toxic,
Yeah.
to varying degrees. Some
Yeah.
obviously there's domestic abuse and crazy scenarios. Some is just a little bit less maybe physically violent, but not supportive and those types of things. So them going back to an environment where it's not as healthy, it's like them taking, the 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, which is really frustrating for me as a speaker,
Yeah.
to kind of have that same thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
when you made that switch to,
Mm,
okay, I'm going to work with the adult people, the big
yeah.
people, how scary was that to do? Was that a big shift, a big change, or were you like, no, I feel called, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm not even second guessing it?
Yeah, I definitely felt called to that. I knew it was what I was supposed to be doing. Even to this day, the challenge actually became convincing parents that that was the way through, that
Yeah.
we were going to help their severely anxious child, or their kid who was really acting out. This was going to be the path to addressing that. And I get it, it's hard when you're a parent and you love your kid and you're so worried about what's happening. And so to do something that's a little bit outside the box in terms of what we've always been taught is the right thing. Like, you send your kid to therapy, they get worked on, and then life gets better. And my approach is send yourself to therapy, and then let's see where we go with that. The one exception would be that I actually really also believe, I think always parents need to do their own work around all of this. And sometimes not because they've actually messed it up, but rather because they were gifted a child who's exceptional in some way. My youngest son, he's so brilliant and so hilarious and so sensitive. And I don't mean it in a derogatory, I mean, like, I feel like his nervous system was born without anything covering it. And
Mm.
so it took several years of being on this planet before he was able to kind of, manage being out in the world every day and come home in one piece. And so sometimes as a parent, you need like a champion in your corner who's going to be like, hey, this is a significant situation and here's how we're going to get through it so that your child is okay and so are you. The exception would be that as they become teens, part of the process of individuating and becoming your own person is that you're meant to step away. You're meant to spread your wings and emerge and like figure out who you are and how are you going to do this thing called life. And so I actually think it's very valuable for teens to have what my beautiful colleague Maggie Dent in Australia calls a lighthouse, or several lighthouses, who are those beacons of light out in community. Maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a traditional therapist, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's a music teacher, whoever it is, that they have these lighthouses that when they want to step out of the fold, which they will do, and it's appropriate for them to want that and appropriate for you to support it. And when they want that you have them stepping towards people who will champion them and have their best interests at heart and really be like team your kid, you know? And so I think it's a beautiful thing for teens to have an outlet and space as well.
I love the work that you're doing, and I love that you're preparing the kids for the road ahead, as so many parents today, with the best of intentions, right? But bad practices. There's a whole book on it that's great, and we sent it to all the parents. And it's like they want their kid to be successful, but you got to have them be able to experience a little bit of failure and not get away, and people saying mean things about you, so that you're ready to stand on your own 2 feet and handle what life throws at you. And really, would you agree that that's kind of your job as a parent? Not necessarily to protect them from all these things, but to prepare them, because you're not always going to be there to do the protecting, and they need to be able to have some grit and resilience.
Yeah. And I think there's, it's interesting because there's a balance to be had there, right?
Yes.
There are times when the adversity that children face out in the world is actually too much. It will sink their ship. And so in those kinds of scenarios, as the grown-ups, we're meant to move in and shield in order for the child to be able to go and grow. And then when they've summoned enough of that internal strength to be able to then again step back into the world. And I think, ironically, because I'm part of this whole parenting industry, that this parenting industry has been what has robbed parents of that ability to allow their children to adapt, which means to come to terms with the things that cannot be changed. And accept that it must go a different way. That's the adaptation is the precursor to resilience and grit. And because we're like, no, you have to be really lovely with your children and be gentle and be respectful and be all these things, which I am a proponent of. Like I am part of that gentle, respectful parenting movement. But there's this weird seedy underbelly to that world, which is this belief that you can't ever have your kids be mad at you and you can't ever have your kids be sad.
Oh, it drives me nuts. You're speaking my language.
It's a big problem because you actually, by enabling, you disable. You send them out into the world and they actually they just haven't had the opportunity to know what it feels like for something to be hard and to have to find a different way through, or to have to admit that this isn't the path. They've got to have those experiences. Now, having said that, you don't need to run around and create experiences like that for your kid. Because the world will offer them forward. And when it does, be wise enough to know that this is an opportunity for your child, not a burden.
Mindset shift, like the rain we were talking with at the very beginning.
That's right.
It's raining outside. Am I going to be upset about it every day, or be like, wow, what a lovely place that I get to experience this rain? Either way, it's raining. Let's make this an opportunity to be something positive and be something good. I just love your heart already, Dr. V, because some of the things you've said, even like right now, I'm looking at getting stem cells. I've had like a neck basketball injury for 15 years, and I'm like, I'm sick of this. I want to be able to work out again. And you talk to people, they're like, well, we should take the stem cells from inside your body and we'll, take them out of your bone marrow, put them in your neck, and then we'll do these, next couple steps. That's the best way. Go talk to ones here in the United States. Hey, this is the way to do it. There's, some gray area in the FDA, how we can do this. This is our technique. boom, you talk to the one in the other countries and they're like, oh, that's no good. Everyone thinks that the other way is the horrible way to do it, and only their way is the best way to do it. And I say all that is, it feels like with you, if you do a good job with what you're teaching these parents, they don't need, not that you're not going to continually need to not ever learn anything, or there aren't going to be new obstacles that come up, but if you do a good job, they should have the tools and learn how to be in those moments and handle any situation. And it's not and I laugh at this because it's not a good business strategy. The next course and the next book and the next this, but like my goal, same thing with what we do, is like, hey, this, this is great, but if I'm doing a good job, then you're going to have the tools and everything in your little tool belt to be able to do that. And when I see things that aren't that way, I'm always kind of like a little bit suspicious of like, okay, like maybe, but maybe it's in you. Maybe the answer is in you and you're good enough, you're strong enough, you're smart enough. And if you want it bad enough as a parent, with a little bit of the coaching, that you'll be able to do some of the right things. So and another thing you said about like having those lighthouses, I love that. I've never heard it. Maybe that's more of a Australia thing. I like it. But it takes me back to just like, back in time of like, what's the saying? It takes a village to raise a child. And so it feels like with having role models, mentors, positive adults, older siblings that are positively influencing, that can make all the difference in these kids' lives. So you're checking a lot of boxes for me. And I want to ask you this. This is one I always like to ask people. So do you feel today being a parent is harder than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, back in time? What's your kind of thoughts and opinions on that?
I think way harder.
I do too. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Speak
I
on
always
that.
joke, like if my grandma knew that I was doing what I'm doing now for a living, she'd be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You're telling the parents how to parent? That's messed up. Like she would, like I just know she was real straight up kind of lady, and she would be like, I don't get it. I don't get why we're talking about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so ironically, I mean, I think it's a couple of things. I think that the more you know, the more you know. And almost every parent that I speak with, they're Googling this and reading that and the fire hose with information, and they're overwhelmed by it and they don't know what to do to go forward. And I always say, stop.
Yeah.
Read no more books, like just for the next 6 months. We're not going to read or learn anything more, because I want to walk you back into your own wisdom. Like, you have got this. That's all noise.
Yeah.
Once we're real solid here, then we'll go back to that. You can pick and choose what you want from that big old world. So I think that's one piece. I think it's a lot of information for parents, and that has like you are held almost arrested by like, what is that? Paralysis by analysis. Like, it's just
Yeah.
The other thing, though, is I think what parents are contending with today in terms of what their children are up against is next level. I've the last couple of years been involved with this quite large campaign around making social media be safer for kids. And when you look at like the toxic beauty culture or the appearance-based culture for both boys and girls on social media, when you look at how kids can be targeted still on social media with advertising, I mean, it's horrid what goes on.
Terrifying.
And that's one thing. But then I'm like, okay, so now I gotta know TikTok, and I gotta know Snapchat, and I gotta know like all these things. And I'm like I'm almost 50 years old.
Yeah.
I can't stay on top of all of that stuff. And so I think parents have the learning curve is like straight up and down with what they're trying to navigate so that they can show up for their children. And I have just huge heart. I have huge heart for kids in that. I think it's a totally different thing to be a kid these days, and a huge heart for parents in that, because there's a lot that they have to take on.
Yeah, there's more going on. So harder to be a parent today and harder to be a kid today. Yeah, I agree so much on that. It's and you get frustrated when you're an older person, because you're like, hey, I had to look at all the obstacles for you just to get to school and be able to practice skating in this cold and the elements. I literally, I'm like, is she telling my basketball story in Alaska? This is pretty funny. But if it's not their fault, and this is something I've really had to work on my own heart in being empathetic of like, this is the hardest thing they know. If the hardest thing this teenage girl's ever known is all of her friends turning her back on her and going and tagging things that she can't be at and using social media to hurt her, this is the hardest thing that she's ever experienced, and that's not her fault, and that's going to affect her in a certain way. I do love, I have to say, what you were saying earlier too, of you tell people, hey, I'm not an expert. And I feel like we try to do this as well on our end, is this is just one person who has a lot of experience or credentials or written books that are best-selling, whatever it is, opinion on this. Every kid, every situation is going to be different. And if anyone comes and tells you this is exactly what you should do if your kid is self-harming or using substances, I would run the other way, just like the stem cell people who are being like, those people, they're trying to con you and you're going to grow a third arm and head. It's that same thing. It's like, no, I believe this. This is why I'm sharing it with you. This is what I think. This is why you're coming to me. But take everything with a grain of salt. And I think in today's world, we have to do that with everything, whether it's parenting, whether it's politics, whether it's what you're being taught at church or whatever religious denomination you are. All right, cool. But also let me use my brain and back to your main message. Let me be in this moment. I love that. I'm stealing that and gonna use it.
Your next tattoo, you can just have it right down your arm.
Yeah. Well, it'll be my first tattoo, but I like it. I like it.
You're welcome.
So one thing, I feel like we focus so much on the negative, and I do have a couple things that I want to go there and get your input on. But as far as celebrating wins, do you have, like, I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but do you have one that comes to mind right now of a success story of a parent that you've worked with that might have a kid that's struggling in a way that other parents could relate to, and just kind of hear how that's transformed their life?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, I could go in so many directions, but I'm thinking, I just actually had an update from this client who's now off at university and living their best life. And I got to, like, it was just so wonderful to hear from them and to know how brilliantly well they're doing. And it's a brilliant story because it really pulls back the curtain on everything that you and I have just spoken about. So this is a teen who came in at around age 15, arguably diagnosable with OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder, self-harming, and a lot of suicidal ideation. So thinking about the idea that she might be better off just not in this world. And isolated from friends, isolated in community, rarely leaving her bedroom, those kinds of things. And what's amazing is that her parents showed up so magnificently. Even though she was, 15 going on 16, they knew that part of this was going to be them, like them showing up, them doing their work, them understanding her inner workings so that they could shift and adjust the environment around her, them making all of that happening, them checking in with their own fear. Like when you have a child who's self-harming and thinking about dying, it's hard to not bathe in fear all the day long. But if you bathe in fear all the day long, so too is your child now bathing in fear. And they already got a lot going on, so they don't need that from you. And so how do you summon from inside of yourself as a parent that, I always call it swagger, like that ability to walk into that situation and be like, hey, darling, I got you and I got me and I got us, and we're going to find our way. And even if you have no idea what the way through actually is, that you will figure it out because you're their parent, and that's what parents do. Like this family showed up in that way. And concurrent to them coming in for their own support around that and really digging into the hard things, including some family dynamics and other sort of related issues, their child showed up too. And got to be seen and heard. I heard you say those words earlier. And I just think that's the definition of what it is to be experienced as human. When you can sit with someone who can see into your soul and is just gifted at being able to give you the experience of being seen and heard. And so she came in, and really the entire treatment modality with her was just to see and hear her. It wasn't wizardry. There's no like magical tricks and like we did CBT this and XYZ that.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. It was the gift of being seen and heard, just to hold space long enough while her parents dug in and did their work. And do
Mhm.
you know, it took a year and a half,
Yeah.
and she walked right out of that bedroom and out into the world. She was the valedictorian at her high school graduation, got up in front of this huge crowd of people, gave a speech.
Terrifying. The number one fear
Terrifying.
of most people.
Yes, won scholarships, headed off the following year on an exchange program overseas as a kid who didn't leave her bedroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And came back from that, had the best time ever. And like really, having just heard from her recently, is living her very best life. Are there still bumps in the road? Yeah. Are there still days where she feels that darkness kind of coming back in, and she has to remind herself that this is temporary and emotions are meant to be felt and they're like waves and this too shall pass and all of those kinds of things. And she moves through it and wakes up the next morning filled with, this joie de vivre, like wants to live life and live it out loud. And so she does. And I just think for parents to know it can be that dark, like the kind of dark where you have to go and, check all the corners of your child's bedroom for razor blades every day. It can be that dark. And a year and a half down the road, it can be that brilliantly light.
Unbelievable. I got chills. I got goosebumps on that one.
Me
That
too.
is, it's just, it, and no matter where these parents come to you or me from, it's always like, I just want to tip my hat and commend them for just making the effort to like figure out like, because the truth is there isn't anything that you wouldn't do to help your kid through this
Mhm.
situation. And a lot of times it's just they don't know what to do.
Yes.
If that's what it's going to take, I'm going to have to do that to have this transformation that's absolutely incredible happen in my daughter's life. Then yeah, I'm going to check the room. There isn't an amount of money I wouldn't pay. There isn't a distance I wouldn't go. There isn't anything that I wouldn't do for that. And I just love that unselfishness and that agape love that parents have that is just kind of so innate a lot of times, and to deal with these different challenges. So I just
Yeah.
love that story. I love what you're doing.
Mhm.
And it reminds me of one of the biggest thing that I talk to parents about is instilling confidence in their teens. Because if they have that confidence, like you said, how are you going to show up for your kid as the adult? And a great life lesson that Dr. E, another initial, who we call our in-house teen expert, we did a little chat like this on Sunday, and she was reminding me of, I go, what's the best piece of advice? And she goes, start with yourself. If you
Yes.
do things on yourself, just like you're saying, how are you going to show up and be a leader for your family, mother or father? How are you going to show up when it's raining outside and it's dark times? And how are you going to be and handle that situations? Because they're going to see, and that's going to rub off, and that swagger, as you like to say, will make all the difference. So it's just like reinforcing reminder, be confident, stand up, and know that there is hope. I feel like
Yes.
hope is such a powerful thing too. So I mean, with the pandemic, did you see just a crazy impact on the parents and families that you work with, like
Yeah.
this you were just sharing, that
Yeah.
made it harder for them to be afraid to go outside, to get out of car and go into school and those types of things? What type of kind of, I guess, differences have you seen since that isolation for most people?
That was a really interesting time because interesting because that, through my work, I interact with a cross section of the population that was already really struggling before the pandemic hit. And then the pandemic hit, and of course the worry was that they were all going to do worse.
Mhm.
Um, and to be clear, some did. And the interesting thing is though that some of them did a lot better.
Mhm.
So much so that there's a phenomenon coming out of that we're calling the K curve. So if you draw the letter K, there's, an
Yep.
arm that goes up and an arm that goes down. And for the kids, and well, for the kids who struggled, whose mental health deteriorated over the pandemic, oftentimes there were things in the environment that they were stuck in that weren't optimal. And not that they necessarily had bad parents. Like, it doesn't always come down to that it's the parent's fault, but maybe a parent had lost a job. Or maybe there was, there was so much struggle and strife in a lot of marriages through the pandemic because everybody was so stressed and so isolated that it played out that way. So there were dynamics playing out in their environment that made it worse. Then there were other cases where, we were all stuck at home or safe at home, depending how you wanted to look at that. And in some of those homes, just like glorious things were happening, where families got to come back together, and moms and dads and parents all over the world got to be with their children and turn the volume down on life and not be running here and there and everywhere all the time, but just be like hanging out and like having dinner together and, like throwing the ball around in the backyard or whatever it was, that they got to have that time that they didn't get to have before. And those kids are the kids that suddenly started to just do really well. It was like the so-called anxiety disorder that they had before. It wasn't inherent to them. It was a byproduct of the chaos of life. And as that chaos settled down, they were able to kind of like come back online, and you could see like the light come back into their eyes. And so there definitely were a lot of families, and thus a lot of kids, who really struggled through that and who today are struggling still. The numbers pre-pandemic here in Canada were 1 in 5 children pre-pandemic were, struggling with mental health in some way. Those numbers have swelled to 1 in 3.
Wow. Okay.
So we cannot say that there was not a lasting impact around all of that. And it's interesting to see where the success stories were in the pandemic, and that it was all environment.
Yeah, but I love the way the way that you look at that from the perspective of the glass half full. Okay, yes, that there was things that were less than ideal for most people, but either way, everyone had the same situation pretty much. All right, well, what now? Is this going to be a positive thing or a negative thing? And for those who said, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of this time together, we're going to become closer as a family, beautiful things were able to happen. And the ones that weren't willing to do those things, it accelerated probably the negative things that were already going on. There's a quote from a famous basketball coach, and it goes, "Things work out the best for those who make the best out of how things work out." And I saw the same thing with adults, because I think at the end of the day, we're all just big kids. We're all struggling in different areas. We're all trying to figure it out. We just get better at hiding it, usually as we get a little older, or we get bitter and go the other way. But for the most part, we get a little bit better at, acting like we got all our ducks in a row. And just like you said, there's people that the pandemic came, they pivoted, they got better relationships, closer with the family, they made more money, they got in better shape. And then there's people that sat around and drank, 7 nights a week, and their relationships failed, and for better or worse, they went separate ways and all these things. So we always have that ability to choose, okay, this is what it is. What now? What do I do right now? How am I going to be in this moment? I just love going back to the be, but how am I going to be in this moment?
That's right.
So I'm wondering, for you, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see parents making today?
When parents react instead of respond, it almost always goes sideways. And I'll tell you what I mean. Somebody once told me, I have this beautiful friend, Ranbir Kaur is her name, and she's a gorgeous healer in her own right. And she said, the longest path we will ever travel is the one from the head to the heart. And I remember thinking about that for my own self as a mother. And, like I've studied a long time. I continue to be a lifelong learner to this day. I've been in practice for years. I do all the things. And you know what? There's days when I yelled at my kids. There's days when I was a reactive mom. And I had lots of moments of being down in the weeds like that. And I remember thinking like, Like, what is happening? Like, I know this. I know this stuff. I know that's not the way to go about this. Why? Like, why do I just meditated on this last night. And this morning, even before they're going to school, I've like opened my yelly, shouty mom mouth and gone all crazy on them. Why? Why do we get reactive instead of being able to sit in the moment and actually respond from a space of wisdom? And the answer is that when we are growing ourselves, so when I was a child, when you were a child, when the parent that's coming to the office tomorrow was a child, the environment around us created our minds. Then we grew up and became adults, at least in form.
Yeah.
And that mind formed for us when we were children. That mind is now creating the environment around us. It's creating our life. And in that life, in that environment, that's where our children are growing. And so, I think it's that, like, every morning when we leave for school, son, you're supposed to have your backpack all ready to go. You're supposed to have your water bottle all ready to go. And that lunch bag needs to be in your backpack. Like, that's the deal. We've been doing this for like 11 years.
Yeah.
Like, surely you figured it out by now, right? And so in the moment when we get out to the car and we're halfway to school and he's like, Mom, I forgot my lunch. Can you drop it by later? And I feel it come up in me. I'm like, are you joking me? Like, I gave you life.
Yeah.
Like, pack your lunch already or whatever it is, right?
Hold up your end of the bargain.
Right. I got a million things going on today. I don't have time for that. So where is that coming from? I'm not saying that it's a problem for me to be like, oh, hey, buddy, here's what we're going to do about your lunch today. Here's $10. You're going to buy lunch at the cafeteria. Or, yep, no problem. When I'm on my way back from the gym, I'll drop something by. So we're going to problem solve that. And then probably later that day, if I'm being responsive rather than reactive, I'm going to say, okay, so the thing that happened with your lunch this morning, we're all humans and we all make mistakes. And so I get it, because I got mornings where I don't have it all together either. And here's what we're going to do tonight in terms of being proactive around planning for this for tomorrow so that we can make sure that we're on it. Can I count on you? And then we'll have it solved. But if I feel like it's coming up inside of me and what I want to say or actually do sometimes say out loud is, are you kidding me? Like, are you for real right now? Because did we not just talk about this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if I'm going to do that kind of like, sort of response, that actually has nothing to do with my child. My kid did not make me react that way. I made me react that way. And in fact, the trigger behind why I reacted that way existed long before my child was even born. Like, I'm running some program where, like, maybe it's the program that I'm not good enough. And if my kids aren't, up to standard, then I haven't done a good enough job. And so my not good enough program just like falls out of my mouth. And then I go all reactive on my kid. When I can understand that my reactivity to my children has nothing to do with my children, then you're doing great.
Yeah.
Because then you can bring that up to the light of day. You actually shift your inner world. You shift your being, which will then shift your doing. So if I had to say, like, the biggest thing for parents to make sense of, it's to know that Viktor Frankl said it best: between stimulus and response, there is a space.
Yeah.
In that space is your power to choose. And in that choice lies your freedom. You get to choose. You get to choose whether to be reactive and get triggered and with your kid, or whether to be like, oh, check it out. We left our lunch at home today. Okay, here's how we're going to do this today. And here's what the plan is for tomorrow.
I feel like we could change the world if we could get every parent, every teen, every just human to embody, don't react, respond. We call it the psychological red zone, when you're like, oh, I feel this coming out, like I'm on a 7 or 10 or 7 or higher out of 10 scale. Like, that's not the time to make any decisions. Don't eat food. Don't let any words out of your mouth. Give it some space if you can, and teach that, because also when you have that trigger and you have that impulse, which is pretty justified in a lot of from what the example you used, they're then seeing how you react and respond, and they're going to model that as well. So it's so
Yeah.
important to do that. Oh, man, I love that one. You said something earlier about you were working on a commission or a board, something with social media. I have such strong opinions on the phone and the impact that it's having on people, culture, kids, the world, everything. What is your thoughts on social media with kids, the phone, their relationship with screen time? I mean, I know we don't have 3 hours, but
Or
what
3 days.
what are you advising parents when it comes
Yeah.
to them battling their kids about their phones?
Here's the thing. As human beings, we are part of a social species. The drive to connect is potent and powerful. In fact, it is the overriding force of life. We will seek connection above food if it were to come down to that. And
Wow.
so connect is everything.
Yeah.
The thing is that the way we were meant to connect with each other is to like look into the whites of each other's eyes and like be with one another. That's how we're meant to be connected and to have our connection cup be filled up every single day. Then along comes the technology revolution, which happened in the blink of an eye. And like Facebook became a thing the year my 19-year-old son was born. Like just like wrap your head around that.
Yep.
So
Yep.
imagine in those 19 years, what's transpired and how fast that has happened. Normally, when revolutions are upon us, we have hundreds of years to adjust our culture and, close the gaps and make sure that this all plays out the way that serves us best. We didn't have that opportunity. And problematically, given that our overriding drive, the force of life is connection, we will always contort whatever is available to us in the name of connection, for better or for worse. So enter social media, where you just open this thing up, you get on it, you're like heart, LOL, whatever you're doing. My kid, they take pictures of their forehead to keep their
In point
Snapchat.
five.
I don't understand any of it. Like you just have to keep the stream going or whatever it's called. The stream.
Yeah.
Now I sound like an old person.
I feel the same way.
And the idea is that if those days when maybe you have never done this, but I certainly remember doing this, especially when I was younger, where you just eat like garbage all day, like potato chips and brownies and like garbage because you're like hanging out with your friends or you're off at camp or wherever, and you just have garbage food all day. And then it's dinner time.
Yeah.
And you go sit down at your parents' dinner table and they've made this gorgeous, nutritious, scrumptious feast. And you're like, oh, no, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the difference between social media and actual connection that feeds the soul of us as human beings.
We need.
So social media all the day long, is junk food. And then your kids come home and you're like, hey, how was your day today? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. Who'd you talk to? Nobody. They're not interested in feasting at your table because they've been snacking on junk food all the day long. So I really think, and it's not your fault. I want parents to know, like sometimes it is your fault, but in a lot of cases, it's not your fault. You're up against something so much more powerful than you could ever imagine. Yeah. And it is upon us as parents to get educated about that, and upon us as parents to allow for our children to step into that world. You can't throw the baby out with the bath. Like it's there. It's not going away. So let's teach them how to be wise consumers of that social media landscape, and also wise contributors to that social media landscape. I think we have to think about how old, we have to think about what we're allowing and what we're not allowing. How do we have spaces in our home that are reserved for actual connection, that are reserved for actual rest? Like how are you going to set up the logistics of your home and the logistics of your family so it serves the ultimate purpose of human connection, and start them when they're knee-high to grasshoppers? Like know that you want to start as you wish to go, which is to have the boundaries be very clearly defined and to titrate out very slowly.
Mm. Yeah, it's such a complicated thing. And when I watch these documentaries and talk to these experts, and they're like, so what's the solution? And it's usually like, I don't know yet. Like, it's like, I'm like, that's not a
Question
good
mark.
sign. But I know you're onto something there with having systems in place, because I believe with all my heart that no human has the self-control, discipline, be able to handle it from a chemical standpoint of
Yeah,
dopamine, to not want to know what people are saying about them, to not want to know what people are doing. Like, you have to have a system of, hey, I don't maybe use this, or I don't go on here, or if
mhm,
I do, there's a
yeah,
timer on. Like you said, we
yeah,
don't do it at the dinner table. We don't do it in the bedroom at night. The phone stays out. Otherwise, it's too powerful. I see adults every day that can't handle it. Like, and I'm
yeah.
like, man, social media is letting me know that you have a brain disorder, and you don't even realize you're just putting it out on full display with the selfies and need for attention and all these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that, and I think those systems are so
Hmm.
critical.
Hmm.
I want to ask you now, since we're kind of talking about social media, you've built an awesome community. You got a
Mm.
big following, hundreds of thousands of people on Instagram. You're doing other things in all your different programs for parents. Where is the best place for people to check you out? And also, how did you build such amazing community? How did you do
Ah, ah. So I mean, I'm very active on social media, and I do think there's a space and a place for using social media to our benefit, that it can be like a community. And it's an interesting thing to think about, how it can be used for good rather than against us. The growth on social media really came at about ironically, it was my now 19-year-old son who's like, Mom, why don't you have an Instagram account? And so when he was like, I don't know, 13 or 14 years old, he's like, here, and took my phone from me, made me an Instagram account. And so that's how it started. And along the way, it's really about, I used to have this giant fear of public speaking and really struggled as a young person to be up in front of crowds of people and talking. And as I got older, the passion that I have for believing, like, we could, what you said earlier about changing the world, like, if every parent and every big person everywhere could really understand how important it is to respond rather than react, we could change the world. I believe that.
it?
I believe with every cell of my being that in one generation, we could change it all. And that passion overrides everything for me. And on social media, to be able to put out just, they're usually, sometimes they're just, phrases or quotes, but oftentimes they're videos.
Yeah,
And I can watch them and I'll remember who I was with in that room on the day that I spoke those words. I'll remember the feeling that was inside my being when I spoke those words. And I just feel like it's that passion that comes through and builds a community of like-minded people who all desire the same thing. They want for our kids to be okay. And together we can, be very powerful in how we affect those outcomes for our children, not just the kids that live in my house, but our kids
yeah.
globally and universally.
Yeah, back to that. It takes a village. We got to all be in this together and putting good things. That's one thing. There'll be a call to action when I go speak at schools, and they'll be like, whoever writes the funniest joke gets a prize, and I give out a lot of stuff, so it's fun, and so they all want to do it because they've seen me give out a lot of things, right? Bribery, and there'll always be a couple comments of like, oh, he just wants more followers and wants more people, and I'm like, you're right, I want every single one of you guys to follow me, because what I'm posting is things that are going to benefit in your life. It's not the TikTok skit videos where this, that, and the other thing, like, because so much of it is such pollution and such a waste of their time. And so I'm like, yep, you nailed it. That's exactly what I want. I want things like what you're putting out for parents and what we're putting out for teens and parents and these
Mm.
different things. So I just love the work that you're doing. I'm so happy that we were able to connect and make this happen today. I know you were a busy lady running off to Australia and speaking to thousands of parents out there, and sounds like just such an amazing trip. I'm so jealous. And I just want to take a second just to thank you for the amazing
Mhm.
work that you're doing. Just even sharing that one story from the daughter who was going through a really dark period and having a difficult time, and that transformation. And I know that there's hundreds and hundreds of families that you've helped like that. And I'm going to make
Mhm.
sure that we point all of our people in your direction, because a lot of people would see this as like, you don't want to collaborate with someone who could be a competitor or someone who's in your space. But I don't see it like that, because I see the people that are going to be drawn to you in your light, in your message. They need to see you. They need to be aware of you. And then the people that have kids that are into basketball and the things that we're doing with kids, they'll find us one way or another. So just what you said summed it up so perfectly, is we're all in this together as a community, whether that's locally in our little town, in our country, or globally. So
Mhm.
thank you again for the work that you're doing.
Mhm.
Let us know how we can help. We'll point all these people to you. There's so much value in this. And I know you have a heart out here in a second. So last quick question is, if you were going to jump in that time machine and you were going to go back, you're about to have your first kiddo. I think you said, well, we won't say how long ago it was, but you're about to have your first kiddo. What would be the best piece of advice that you would tell yourself?
So that he will turn 20 in just over a month. And if I could rewind the clock 20 years, I would tell that version of myself, you've got this. Like, you really have got this. You don't need to crowdsource how you're going to raise your kid, because the wisdom and the light that you as his mother can bring to his life is, bottom line, hands down, all it is that he needs. I would want for her to know it's already in her. It's already written in the stars. Just lean into it.
You're enough. You are enough. A perfect message. Let's call it a day. Thank you again so much. This was so amazing. And I can't wait to do many more awesome things like this in the future with you.
I
Appreciate
love it.
you.
You are magic. Thank you so much.